David Benavidez does not pressure opponents like a man simply walking them down. He advances like a fighter, taking ownership of the ring, one measured step at a time. The hand speed is usually the first thing that catches the eye, because it seems almost unfair on a body that big. He throws in clusters, with the quick rhythm of a lighter man and the thudding effect of someone built to make every block shot feel expensive. A jab from him is rarely just a jab. It can be a rangefinder, a blindfold, a warning, or the first note in a combination that has already moved past the defender's first answer. When Benavidez lets his hands go, the punches arrive with a crowded feeling. Hooks wrap around the guard. Uppercuts rise through gaps that were not open a second earlier. Straight shots force the gloves inward, and the next punch punishes whatever has been exposed. That is the part fans remember, because violence is easier to replay than positioning. But the deeper truth of his style lives in the moments before the explosion. Benavidez is not only trying to hit a man, he is trying to place him somewhere he does not want to be. His pressure has structure, and that structure is what separates it from simple forward motion. A reckless aggressor chases. Benavidez herds. He understands that elite boxers are most dangerous when they are given clear exits. If a fighter can circle freely, clinch comfortably, pivot without being touched, or make the pursuer reach, then pressure becomes an invitation to be embarrassed. Benavidez works to remove those choices quietly. He inches forward without looking desperate. He keeps his shoulders relaxed enough to suggest patience, even while his feet are cutting off the useful parts of the canvas. A slight step outside can close a turning lane. A half feint can freeze the hips. A jab into the gloves can disguise the movement that matters more than the punch itself. By the time the opponent notices the trap, he is often already standing inside it. That is why the ring seems to shrink when Benavidez is in command. The other fighter may begin with the comfort of distance, believing there is space to work. Then the corners start appearing sooner. The ropes seem to arrive earlier than expected. The clean pivot becomes a cramped turn, and the reset becomes a retreat made under stress. At the highest level, those small losses become dangerous. A boxer does not need to be badly hurt for the fight to begin changing. He only needs to be made slightly late, slightly narrow, slightly uncertain. One awkward step can disturb the balance. One blocked exit can force the guard higher than planned. One missed beat can leave the body open for the next wave. Benavidez is skilled at recognizing those little disturbances. He sees when the feet come too close together. He senses when the chin rises during a hurried escape. He notices when a man is no longer choosing his position but accepting the only one left available. That is when his volume becomes more than activity. It becomes a form of interrogation. Every punch asks a question, and the opponent is forced to answer while backing up, while bracing, while trying to breathe, while calculating how far he is from safety. Some punches are meant to score cleanly. Others are meant to occupy the hands. Others are thrown to keep the defender's vision busy while Benavidez steps into a better lane. The accumulation is physical, but it is also mental. A fighter facing him must defend the shot that is coming, prepare for the shot after it, and worry about the ground he is losing at the same time. That divided attention is costly. It turns defense into labor. A man can block well and still be dragged into an exhausting fight. He can catch the jab and surrender position. He can absorb the right hand on his gloves and feel the force travel through his arms. He can slip the first hook and rise into the path of the second. Against Benavidez, correct answers do not always feel like relief. Sometimes they only delay the next problem. That is one of the more punishing aspects of his approach. He makes survival feel active. There is very little rest inside his pressure, because even the quieter moments carry a threat. When he pauses, it is not always a break in the attack. It can be a test. It often starts in a way that feels almost calm. David Benavidez can stand close enough to make a fighter uncomfortable without throwing right away, using that small silence to see what kind of fear comes back at him. The man in front of him has to make a decision before the first punch arrives. Is Benavidez waiting to counter, stepping into another combination, or simply daring him to move first? That uncertainty is part of the punishment. A relaxed guard invites the jab. A wide circle gives Benavidez room to cut the ring off. A lazy reach for the clinch opens the lane for a short uppercut. A shell that climbs too high leaves the ribs exposed. This is not pressure as noise or activity thrown out just to look busy. It is pressure built like a trap, where every answer takes something away and every escape route carries a cost. Benavidez does not only punch at openings. He punches to create the next one. When a high guard protects the chin, the elbows begin to float. When the elbows clamp down, the center line becomes easier to split. When a fighter leans forward to smother a straight shot, his head drifts into uppercut range. When he steps back from the first attack, his feet often settle for a fraction too long, and the ropes suddenly become more than a boundary. They become another hand on his shoulders. That is where David Benavidez becomes draining in a way highlights rarely explain. The best clips show speed, volume, and clean impact, but they do not always show the choices being stripped from the opponent one by one. A man may protect one target, but he gives up another. He may survive one exchange, but he comes out of it with less room, less breath, and less certainty. Because Benavidez is so quick for his size, those decisions arrive faster than the body wants to process them. The first punch does not need to land perfectly. It only has to lift a glove, turn a shoulder, break a stance, or hold a fighter in place for a beat longer than he planned. The second shot does not need to end the sequence. It only has to keep the defender occupied. Then, the damaging punch arrives from a different line, bending around the elbow, driving through the guard, or digging underneath with the kind of sound that changes the feeling of a round. Body punching is often described as an investment, but for Benavidez, it is also a method of taking ownership of space. A fighter who has been hurt under the ribs does not move with the same freedom. A bruised body makes every pivot feel heavier. After clean shots downstairs, a man begins to brace before contact, and that anticipation steals energy before the punch even lands. His feet become careful. His exits become shorter. His turns lose their bite. The ring feels smaller because his body no longer trusts every command. Benavidez does not always need the classic body shot posture, the deep dip, the loaded hip, the single dramatic hook that everyone in the arena can see coming. He can throw that punch when the opening is obvious, but much of his damage is hidden inside the rush of his combinations. A right hand can pin the guard in place. A left hook can pull the elbow just far enough from the ribs. Then a compact shot lands downstairs before the defender has fully understood why the gap appeared. It is quick, mean, and difficult to prepare for because it arrives without a warning sign. The body shot is folded into the conversation, collected in the middle of the argument, while the opponent is still answering something else. That matters because fighters are taught to survive storms upstairs by staying disciplined behind their gloves. Against David Benavidez, that discipline can become a trap. The higher the hands rise, the more available the body becomes. The longer the guard stays locked in place, the easier it is for him to work around it, through it, and beneath it. After enough punishment downstairs, the guard no longer feels like shelter. It begins to feel like a room with no door. A fighter can hear punches thudding against his arms. He can feel shots curling around the sides. He can sense Benavidez edging closer, balanced and ready, shoulders twitching, hands already prepared to restart the assault. The panic is not always written on the face. Sometimes it appears in the breathing. He may survive the exchange, but survival comes with attacks, and David Benavidez has built much of his identity around making opponents pay it. A fighter gives up balance when he leans away from the first shot. He gives up space when he takes that extra step toward the ropes. He gives up air when his gloves stay pinned to his temples and the punches keep thudding into his arms. Benavidez reads those little concessions as invitations. He is not always hunting for the single cinematic punch that ends the night in one violent moment. More often, he is creating a fight where every defensive decision leaves something behind. If the opponent circles right, Benavidez moves with him just enough to close the clean lane and keep the exchange alive. If the opponent drifts left, the jab can touch the gloves, disturb the eyes, and make the turn feel crowded. If the opponent stays planted, the combinations begin to stack against the guard, shoulders, ribs, and chest until defense becomes a form of labor. That is when his pressure starts to feel different. It is not wild pursuit. It is occupation. Benavidez wants the opponent working even when he is not being hit clean. He wants the shoulders tight, the elbows busy, the feet uncertain, and the mind constantly sorting through new threats. That is why the body attack is so important to his control. A shot downstairs is not only a search for pain, it is a way to change the opponent's posture. It lowers the center of gravity. It shortens the step. It makes a man think twice before taking the same wide exit he used earlier. A clean body shot can steal more than breath. It can steal timing. It can make the counter arrive a fraction late. It can turn a confident pivot into a cautious shuffle. It can make a fighter raise his guard with his hands while protecting his ribs with his thoughts. When David Benavidez lifts the guard with punches upstairs and then digs underneath it, he is not just scoring in the moment. He is investing in the next minute of the round. The first body shot may be hidden behind pride. The second may be absorbed with a hard stare. The third begins to show in the feet. The man who used to slide out smoothly starts leaving on a shorter stride. The man who used to roll and answer now rolls and pauses. The man who once fired back at the end of an exchange suddenly needs a breath before he can return anything meaningful. Benavidez thrives inside that pause. His offense becomes difficult to untangle because each part feeds the next. Position gives him the chance to throw. Volume forces the opponent to choose. Those choices expose small openings. Small openings allow damage to accumulate. Damage makes the next positional battle easier to win. Nothing has to look dramatic for the trap to be closing. That is one reason his fights can feel so overwhelming on film. David Benavidez does not require every punch to land perfectly for the sequence to serve him. A right hand on the gloves can freeze the guard long enough for the next punch to matter. A hook on the elbow can bend the frame and pull the defender out of shape. A jab that only brushes the forehead can break the rhythm of a counter. Even a miss can have purpose if it leaves him at a better angle, with his feet under him and the opponent still reacting. That distinction is essential to understanding his pressure. Benavidez is aggressive, but he is not simply chasing contact. He often lets the punch carry him into position. When he steps behind the jab, the rear foot usually follows with enough discipline to keep his balance alive. He remains close enough to continue working, but not so square that every exchange becomes an even trade. From that stance, he can alter the conversation quickly. Straight punches can become hooks. Head attacks can drop to the ribs. A combination that begins through the front door can suddenly arrive around the side. Those changes matter most against opponents who are comfortable surviving the first wave. A high guard can handle predictable traffic. If punches come one at a time or travel on the same line, a defender can shell up and wait for the storm to pass. Benavidez makes that shell responsible for too many problems at once. He touches the gloves with the jab, then bends a punch around them. A fighter can cover one door, but the room still has windows. He can lift the guard to protect his head, but that weight slows the feet beneath him. He can choose movement, but movement steals the base he needs to punch with real force. He can answer with pride, but if the answer comes while he is drifting backward, the punch is often a request for room, not a threat meant to end the conversation. David Benavidez has built much of his danger on knowing that difference before the crowd can see it. He studies not only what comes at him, but why it is being thrown. There are punches meant to punish him, and there are punches thrown because the other man wants him to stop walking forward. Benavidez treats those two things very differently. When he senses true authority, he respects the position behind it. When he senses panic, he does not mistake contact for command. That is why certain counters seem to bounce off his intention. It is not that David Benavidez cannot be touched. It is that he often knows the touch has no weight behind it beyond survival. A jab fired by a man stepping back into the ropes is not the same weapon as a jab driven from a planted stance. A hook thrown while turning away is not the same warning as a hook launched by a fighter prepared to stay and trade. Benavidez reads those small confessions quickly. If the opponent pays a punch as the price of escape, Benavidez tries to raise the cost immediately. He closes the step, brings the guard just high enough to dull the return, crowds the shoulder, and restarts the exchange before the defender can celebrate the space he thought he had earned. That is where his size becomes more than a tale of height and reach. He simply stands tall in front of a man. He fills the space in a way that makes the ring feel smaller than it looked at the opening bell. His lead foot, lead shoulder, and lead hand often arrive together, and the opponent has to solve all three at once. The glove is only the visible part of the problem. Behind it is a frame that blocks the turn, occupies the lane, and promises another punch if the defender waits too long. Many fighters understand that pressure exists, but they do not understand its shape until Benavidez has already placed them inside it. From the outside, a half step may look harmless. Inside the ropes, that half step can turn a clean exit into a bad angle, and a bad angle into a corner. Benavidez does not always need to rush directly forward. Often he leans the pressure slightly off-center, just enough to make the escape route narrower than it should be. If the opponent wants to circle, he must move around the lead foot. If he wants to fire, he must punch from a lane where the reply is already loaded. If he wants to clinch, he has to reach into a bigger body that is waiting to collapse the distance and keep working. Good pressure is cruel because it makes ordinary boxing tasks feel heavy. A simple step becomes a negotiation. A jab becomes a risk. A clinch becomes another place to absorb weight, forearms, shoulders, and short punches. When David Benavidez has a fighter near the ropes, he does not require every shot to land cleanly. He needs the opponent to keep making defensive decisions. A light touch upstairs can lift the gloves. A short right hand can squeeze the guard inward. A hook to the body can pull the elbow down. The next punch can arrive over the top before the defender has fully understood what he surrendered. The speed is real, but the deeper problem is sequence. Benavidez does not throw combinations as decoration. He throws one punch to create the condition for the next one. The man in front of him is rarely defending a single shot. He is defending the consequence of a mistake that happened half a second earlier. That pressure exchanges can feel like they are accelerating even when the pattern is clear. The defender reacts to the jab, then pays for the reaction. He protects the ribs, then gives up the temple. He squares his stance to brace for contact, then loses the angle he needed to leave. David Benavidez is at his best when those choices begin arriving too quickly for comfort. The bodywork is where the larger design becomes obvious. A fighter can hide one weakness for a moment, but the act of hiding it usually exposes something else. Against David Benavidez, that exchange becomes the central bargain of the night. Step away from the right hand, and the lead foot may already be outside yours. Raise the gloves to stop the jab, and the ribs begin to look available. Dip under the hook, and the uppercut starts to feel like it has been waiting there all along. This is why his pressure is more complicated than simple aggression. It is not just a man walking forward because he is strong, durable, and willing to trade. It is a fighter using movement, rhythm, and volume to make defensive choices feel temporary. The opponent is allowed to solve one problem, but Benavidez is already asking the next question before the first answer is complete. His body attack is the clearest example of that logic. The head can slip, roll, and vanish by inches. Fresh legs can buy time, especially in the early rounds when the ring still feels wide and the mind still believes every exit is open. The body is less forgiving. The ribs remain in the same neighborhood. The stomach cannot feint its way out of danger. The liver does not slide to the other side of the ropes. A defender can drop his elbows and protect himself, but that decision changes the entire shape of his guard. Once that shape changes, David Benavidez has information. He sees the gloves pulled inward. He sees the shoulders folding. He sees the head becoming less protected because the fighter underneath is bracing for pain. That is when the attack begins to feel like it has layers. A jab forces the eyes to blink. A right hand pounds against the guard and makes the forearms tighten. A hook wraps around the side and reminds the defender that the shell is not a locked door. Then the shot underneath arrives, sometimes short, sometimes almost hidden, but heavy enough to change the breathing pattern. Body punches do not have to produce a dramatic reaction to matter. Sometimes the only visible sign is a smaller step. Sometimes it is a slower turn. Sometimes it is the way a fighter stops bouncing and begins placing his feet more carefully, as if the floor has become expensive. That is the value Benavidez takes from those punches. He is not only scoring, he is taxing movement. He is making each escape cost a little more than the last one. A fighter with sore ribs does not pivot with the same freedom. He does not bend low with the same confidence. He does not spring away from the ropes as sharply. He begins to choose the exits that hurt less, and those exits are usually easier to predict. Pressure becomes more dangerous once the opponent's imagination has been reduced. The ring may be the same size, but it no longer offers the same number of possibilities. Benavidez thrives in that shrinking world. His combinations often work like construction rather than chaos. He builds one opening by touching another. He goes upstairs to lift the guard, digs underneath to pull it down, then returns to the head before the defender can rebuild the wall. Not every punch must land cleanly for the sequence to succeed. A blocked hook can still shove a glove out of place. A body shot on the elbow can still send a dull shock through the arm. A right hand caught on the shoulder can still turn the opponent square and leave him late for what follows. That is why his volume cannot be dismissed as mere busyness. It is a form of pressure that rearranges posture. He keeps hitting until the opponent is no longer standing the way he wants to stand. Once the stance breaks, even slightly, the targets begin to appear. The frightening part is how calm Benavidez can look while doing it. He is active, but not frantic. He can throw in bunches without seeming desperate for noise. His feet often stay close enough beneath him to punch again, defend, or step with the opponent. He does not need to launch himself into every opening as if one exchange must settle the fight. He is willing to wait a beat. He allows the ropes to help. He watches for a habit to repeat. He notices when a fighter exits the same way twice, blocks the same way twice, or bends at the waist with the same rhythm. Then the burst arrives. To the opponent, it can feel sudden,